6 months after the death of Galen Marek in 2BBY on board the still-in-construction Death Star, not wanting to waste the incredible potential that his former apprentice had revealed, Darth Vader would transfer Galen Marek's remains to the cloning facility on Temura City on Kamino to act as a template, where the genetic engineers there would begin the difficult process of cloning Marek. But due to a combination of difficulties in cloning Force sensitives and accelerating growth of clones, these clones would experience memory flashes of their template, which would cause the clones to go completely insane. After months of failures, Subject 1138 would be the most stable clone that had been produced up to that point, and Darth Vader would begin Subject 1138's training, granting the clone Galen Marek's original codename, Starkiller. During Starkiller's final test, he would experience the memory flashes that had driven all previous clones insane, which would encourage Darth Vader to execute Starkiller. But before he could, Starkiller would experience another memory flash which would cause him to blast Vader with Force Lightning and jump out of the training tower and would battle his way through the cloning facility and escape Kamino in Darth Vader's personal starship. Being driven by Galen Marek's memories, Starkiller would make his way to Keda Nemodia, where he would rescue Jedi Master Rom Koda, believing that he would know how to find the location of Juno Eclipse. After a small detour to the planet Dagobah, Starkiller would discover that Juno was on a ship called the Salvation, but unfortunately by the time Starkiller and Koda got to her, she'd been taken by Boba Fett back to Kamino under the orders of Darth Vader, knowing that Starkiller would come after her. With the help of Koda and the Rebel Alliance, Starkiller would lead an assault on Temura City on Kamino, and after fighting his way through the cloning facility for the second time, he would come face to face with Darth Vader, and after a long and grueling battle, Starkiller would be successful in neutralizing Vader and would be convinced by Rom Koda to take him prisoner rather than execute him. While Darth Vader would eventually escape his captivity by the Rebel Alliance, Starkiller's fate is currently unknown. At the time of the Great Jedi Purge during 19BBY, Cal Kestis was a young Jedi Padawan, and after witnessing the death of his master, would be forced into hiding for 5 years on the planet Bracca, acting as a scrapper until he was discovered by a pair of Inquisitors and ultimately rescued by former Jedi Shir Junda and the pilot Grease on their ship named the Mantis. After encountering a tiny droid named BD-1, Cal would go on a mission to recover a Jedi holocron that had the list of Force-sensitive children that could be trained to form a new Jedi Order. Cal's journey would have him battle countless stormtroopers across multiple planets, befriend a Night Sister named Marin on the planet Dathomir, visit the planet Ilum to build a new lightsaber, and battle the Inquisitors on multiple occasions, and even surviving an encounter against Darth Vader inside the Fortress Inquisitorius, and would ultimately succeed in recovering the Jedi holocron, but would ultimately decide to destroy it in order to keep the Force-sensitive children safe from the Empire. After a period of time, the crew of the Mantis would decide to separate, each wanting to confront the Empire in their own way, and this would lead to Cal forming his own crew to confront the Empire, and over a period of 5 years, Cal's reputation in fighting against the Empire would grow to such a degree that he would be openly recognized as one of the Empire's highest targets. During a mission on Coruscant to recover some important data, Cal would face off once again against the Night Sister Inquisitor, and after a short battle would succeed in cutting down the Inquisitor. As Cal and his new crew attempted to escape Coruscant, all but Cal and his newest ally named Bode would be killed, and Cal would take the now damaged Mantis out of Coruscant's atmosphere. Shortly after arriving on the Kobo system and catching up with his friend Grease, Cal would do some exploring where he would encounter a droid named ZNA4, or Z, who would tell him about a secret planet named Tanalorr. Z would also ask Cal to explore a nearby array located in a forest in order to meet someone important who could tell him more about the planet Tanalorr. While exploring the array, Cal would find a back to take, and it was there he would encounter High Republic Jedi Dagan Gera, and after explaining to Dagan everything that had happened to the Jedi Order, Dagan would be overwhelmed with rage and would attack Cal, only to be recovered by the Jedi warrior Ravis. Knowing that he needed help, Cal would make his way to the planet Jeddah, where he would not only reunite with Marin and Seer, but he would meet Master Cordova, who had returned from his travels of stealing the Zephos, and wished to help his former apprentice Seer. Bode would shortly arrive afterwards, and together the two succeed in tracking down Dagat Gera and actually managed to take him down, successfully defeating him, and would recover a special compass which would allow them to travel safely to Tanalorr. Upon returning to Jedha, the Empire would attack, and Bode would reveal himself as a former Jedi Knight who was working with the Empire as a spy in order to keep his daughter safe. Bode's actions would not only lead to him killing Master Cordova, but allow the Sith Lord Darth Vader to kill Cere. After Cal interrogated an Imperial officer on board an Imperial space station, he, Marek, and Greaves would follow Bode to the planet Tanalorr, and together Cal and Marek would battle Bode and would be successful in killing him. After burning the bodies of Cere, Master Cordova, and Bode, Cal promised Cere that he would build something that would outlast the Empire. Welcome back, you wonderful fans of mine. My name is Brian, the Three Topics Gamer, and we are back for a 7th season of my Versus series. Since many of you last year kept your part of the deal of helping me not only reach my 90,000 subscriber goal, it's now time for me to keep up my end of the deal and bring back this series for one more time, and I'm extremely excited for this first match, which serves as a direct sequel to Season 6's season finale matchup, but this time Cal Kestis from Star Wars Jedi Survivor will be taking on Galen, Marek's clone from Star Wars The Force Unleashed 2. Now before we start, I must make a small recommendation. Because this matchup serves as a direct follow-up to Season 6's finale matchup in which Cal Kestis from Jedi Fallen Order took on Galen Marek from The Force Unleashed 1, I would highly recommend that you haven't seen that matchup video, that you stop this video and go back and watch that video first, then come back to this video. This is because the results of that matchup and how it was broken down will play a major role on how this matchup will be played out. The last time I did something like this, I did my Control Jill from Resident Evil 5 taking on Ada Wong during Season 6, which served as a sequel to my original matchup that I did all the way back in Season 1. But if you're already familiar with Season 6's finale matchup, then you don't have to worry about it. Also, on a final note, I would like to make it very, very clear that the character of the Starkiller Clone that I will be using in this matchup is not the same character that we used in the last matchup, and therefore is not the same character from The Force Unleashed 1. I know this is really confusing, and a lot of people like to combine these two and think that they're the same person, but they are very two different people. Galen Marek's code name in The Force Unleashed 1 was also Starkiller, so when people see the name Starkiller in the title, they may believe it is the same guy, but it's not. Force Unleashed 1 has Galen Marek. Force Unleashed 2 has the Starkiller Clone, also named Starkiller. Genetically, they are the same person, but as combatants, they are very different in how they fight. In the same kind of way that Anakin Skywalker is different from Darth Vader. Physically, it's the same guy, but Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader are vastly different as combatants. Also, when it comes down to breaking Starkiller and his abilities, I'll be describing him mainly as he is described in the 2010 novelization of The Force Unleashed 2. After doing quite a bit of research, it did give me a better understanding of exactly what kind of character he is, and just how different he is from Galen Marek. So if you do happen to enjoy this matchup by the end, please remember to like this video and share it with everybody you know and thinks might enjoy it. And make sure you spread the word and you subscribe to keep track of me and all the future matchups that I plan to upload over the course of this year. And, like always, thank you guys for watching, and without stalling any longer, let's begin this breakdown as I pit Cal Kestis versus the Starkiller Clone, and we will start by comparing them physically. Being the clone of Galen Marek made Starkiller retain the age of a 17-year-old human male standing 6'1", and despite his youth and accelerated growth, allowed Starkiller to develop a body of a well-toned young man who was just entering the beginning stages of his physical prime. Despite not having had the time to go through the same decade-long span of physical training and development that Galen Marek endured, Starkiller's performance in this department of strength, speed, durability, and endurance were still exceptional for someone so young. His strength was significantly enough to not only be able to deliver dedicated power blows while wielding a lightsaber with a single arm, which is normally a weakness that duelists wielding two lightsabers would tend to struggle with, but Starkiller was strong enough to defend himself against Darth Vader's cybernetically enhanced super strength. His speed was fast enough to dodge blaster fire and deliver a barrage of speed-focused attacks faster than most opponents could react to. His durability allowed him to take a great deal of punishment apart from attacks that would be considered death blows and continue to fight at a peak level performance, while his endurance was so well developed that, in my opinion, due to the shortness that the Force Unleashed 2 plot from the time that Starkiller escaped from Kamino, traveled to Caden Amodia, made a pit stop at Dagobah, and then made his way to Kamino, that Starkiller received little to no real sleep, and yet was actually able to keep fighting for long periods of extensive periods of combat against a wide variety of different opponents, concluding with his grueling battle against Darth Vader. Despite being the most stable clone that had been created up to this point, the cloning process would cause Starkiller to suffer memory flashes that had driven many previous clones insane, and would happen to Starkiller during his training and during combat. By the time Cal Kestis made his way to the planet Tanalorr in 9 BBY, he was a 22-year-old human male standing about 5'11". Having been trained from a young age to become a Jedi, by the end of Jedi Fallen Order in 4 BBY, Cal had maintained a slim build and had showed an average level of physical performance in the departments of strength, speed, durability, and endurance that one would expect from someone being trained in the Jedi odds at such a young age. Having had 5 years to develop himself while constantly traveling from planet to planet, fighting against the Empire and other oppositions throughout the series of different forms of missions, greatly improved all of Cal's physical traits during that time period. His ability to maintain a consistent level of high effective combative performance while using various different lightsaber fighting form stances of all ranges in very different qualities shows that Cal Kestis is more than balanced as a physical combatant than he was back in 4 BBY. His ability to defend and outright maneuver non-human opponents like enhanced battle droids and other alien species would have granted Cal a level of physical performance far above what you would expect from a similar humanized Jedi trainee of the same age. Cal had taken direct lightsaber strikes without immediately needing a small period of time to recover and without the need of a health stem from BD-1. At the end of the day, Cal's extensive level of practical combat experience has allowed him to develop at an accelerated rate to such a degree that as a combatant, he would outperform opponents who, in a physical sense, are his superiors. When it comes to comparing Cal Kestis now against the Starkiller Clone, as physical combatants, the gap between these two has gotten a lot smaller than if I was comparing Cal from the Jedi Fallen Order to Galen Marek. Starkiller should be really thankful that Darth Vader cloned Galen Marek when he died, as he was able to match Galen Marek's physical performance to a degree in a matter of months, which Galen had an entire decade of constant training to develop himself. While Cal's 5 years of practical combat experience certainly helped him accelerate his physical capabilities much faster than if the Jedi Order hadn't fallen, or hell, even if the Clone Wars had never happened, I believe that while Cal could certainly prove that he could match Starkiller's physical performance in the levels of speed and endurance, where Cal is still lacking is in the durability and strength departments. Despite Cal having gained a great deal of experience on the battlefield and having the scars to show for it, he has shown that he certainly has a problem taking certain levels of beatings. He has not shown the ability to take the kind of punishment that Starkiller or hell, even Galen could take during his training to endure over a period of time. By having BD-1 always there to lend him a stim pack, if he took too much damage, Cal could always just recover himself, and therefore he really never developed himself as the kind of combatant who can take a great deal of damage and still maintain a combat-ready stance, as opposed to someone like Starkiller, who, much like Galen Marek, was built like a tank, and is the kind of combatant who, if he takes a serious punishing blow, can keep charging at his opponent at full force. What Cal cannot do in a physical sense is match Starkiller in a head-to-head battle of attrition. Now, in Cal's defense, this certainly may not be much of a problem in the martial skill sense, since just about the majority of Force wielders that Cal has ever faced had the durability and strength advantage over him, yet he is still able to defeat most of them. That doesn't change the fact that Cal is going to have to work extremely hard to bring down someone as tough as Starkiller in a direct physical engagement, and it's for these reasons that Starkiller takes the edge in physical capabilities. The twin lightsabers that were constructed were bestowed to the clones who had progressed far enough through their trials. These lightsabers each contain a synthetic crystal which enabled them to produce red blades, and their design was a modified version of the first set of lightsabers that belonged to the original Starkiller. Though ethically, the twin lightsabers had a beautiful design, due to the need to have many of these exact same lightsabers created for the high number of Starkiller clones, these lightsabers were very basic in their design and possessed no special technological additions. The lightsaber that Cal Kestis uses originally belonged to his master Jarrett T'Pol, and while having a vision of his master, the weapon would be damaged. This would lead to Seer giving the emitter that belonged to her lightsaber to Cal, and on the planet Ilum, Cal would use his engineering skills that he had learned as a scrapper, and would combine the two lightsabers together, and by the end of Jedi Fallen Order, allowed the weapon to operate in 3 different modes: single blade, double blade, and the ability to separate the weapon into 2 parts, wielding a lightsaber in each hand. Cal would continue to modify the lightsaber, and at some point would modify the 2 double-bladed lightsabers into a split saber, which allowed Cal to detach his 2 lightsabers into a single-bladed lightsaber, while also being able to attach the 2 ends back together whenever he chose. He would continue to modify his lightsaber, and after defeating the bounty hunter Drya Thorn, he would eventually install 2 vents on the side of the lightsaber called quillions and a blade length adjustment knob which extended the blade to 1.5 meters. This allowed Cal to wield his lightsaber as a crossguard, which was an ancient design that was commonly used by Makashi users during the time of the Great Scourge of Malachor. Cal had also received an LW-A96 blaster pistol from his ally Bode, which had several firing settings. The blaster pistol was capable of firing a charged blast, an electric trip, or special rounds that could ricochet off multiple surfaces. Upon receiving this weapon, Cal would develop an unusual fighting style, which combined using his lightsaber with an extended blade in one hand while wielding the pistol in the other. But I will be sure to talk more about this stance later. With the series of modifications that Cal had engineered into his lightsaber, Cal had created quite possibly one of the most user-friendly lightsabers perhaps ever. I think this round's pretty obvious to call. Starkiller is bringing 2 standard identical lightsabers, while Cal is bringing an even better and more sophisticated lightsaber than he had in Jedi Fallen Order, paired with a unique blaster pistol that has multiple firing setting modes, and one of those modes would be even very effective against lightsabers. Cal Kestis gets the edge in weapons and equipment. Despite Starkiller having a limited amount of time with his combat training, and having even less time having actual combat experience, Starkiller was a powerful and skilled fighter, but compared to his template Galen Marek, there is no question that he was a lesser and weaker combatant in all the departments of lightsaber combat. As Darth Vader wanted to develop Starkiller differently than Galen Marek, Vader would steer Starkiller towards Jar-Kai dual-wielding, specifically the Form for Ataru variation. Form for Ataru, also known as the Way of the Hawkbat, was the most acrobatic form filled with numerous elaborate moves that relied on the user applying runs, jumps, spins, and using the Force to exceed physical feats that were normally impossible. When taken to a high enough level, a user could resemble nothing less than a blur of motion. Ataru in its purest form encouraged one to use the entire body as a weapon and not rely solely on the blade, incorporating physical strikes and kicks if needed, and Starkiller was very accustomed to using punches, kicks, and disarming grabs taken on his opponents. Jar-Kai dual-wielding could be applied with 2 lightsabers, but was normally used with pairing a standard lightsaber along with a shorter Shoto blade. When using 2 lightsabers, it improved a user's ability to apply offensive and defensive coverage and deliver a faster rate of attacks than could be responded with multiple adversaries with one blade to reinforce the other, and due to the greater attention needed to balance out between the 2 blades, it was important that a Jar-Kai user within a specific time could know the exact positions of where the blades were, and Starkiller was very proficient with this ability. Starkiller would perform his required techniques at a very high degree, and he would apply his attacks with a sort of dedication and power, while sticking to a series of attack patterns that he would deliver in a kind of autopilot mode, while his mind would focus on the battlefield deciding what combat approach he should apply next. The memory flashes that Starkiller inherited from Galen Marek helped him develop his use of Niman. Form 6 Neimon, also known as the Moderation form or the Way of the Rancor, was the most hybridized fighting form by incorporating elements from the preceding 5 forms. While I do not believe that Starkiller had enough time to develop his use of Neimon to an exceptional high level, he was effective at taking key elements from the preceding 5 forms into a unique fighting style that was effective on the battlefield. He would use the wide opening swings of Form 1 Sicho to attack multiple enemies, precision strikes from Form 2 Makashi, defensive blocks from Form 3 Surisu, speed from Form 4 Taro, and the reverse grip and power blows from Form 5 Shien. To compensate for Neimon's more relaxed take on blade work, the form encouraged a user to incorporate force powers into their attack sequences, and Starkiller was an expert in applying lightsaber throws to attack his opponents at a distance, using telekinesis strikes while swinging his lightsaber, and even channeling force lightning alongside the blade, which allowed Starkiller to triple his attack range while delivering an overhead power blow. Though Starkiller was capable of fighting with a single lightsaber, his effectiveness in battle was nowhere near that of his template, and it seems that his primary approach to combat on the battlefield was to rely heavily on his force abilities against opponents who were incapable of responding or defending against such assaults, taking the most direct approaches whenever encountering enemy forces. However, when engaging opposing force wielders, Starkiller had to get creative, with his experience against such opponents being quite limited, as the only experience that Starkiller ever had against force wielders were against Saber Guards, Alberite clones, Sith acolytes, and all groups were using identical fighting styles similar to his own, and of course Darth Vader, who I do not believe could have defeated Vader in a true head-to-head engagement. Now, if you've made it this far in the video, I would like to take a moment to address the whole Galen, Marek, and Starkiller Clone defeating Vader controversy right now. So hopefully people don't bring up this argument in the comment section of this video, as I've been dealing with these exact responses in the comment section of the last video for the past 3 years. Most people have this blind opinion that just because Galen, Marek, and Starkiller beat Vader, and because Cal ran away from Vader means that by default, Galen and the Starkiller Clone should beat Cal. And while I will admit that even if Jedi Survivor Cal challenged Vader, he would more than likely lose, there are a number of major key factors in both of Vader's battles against Galen, Marek, and the Starkiller Clone that most of you have never even considered. Galen Marek to me was trained to be the quintessential Darth Vader killer. How he was trained as a lightsaber fighter and how he developed his force abilities applied alongside having 10 years of direct training with Vader means that he understood Vader as a combatant intimately and would make Galen Marek the perfect candidate to replace Vader, which is exactly what Darth Sidious wanted, and Sidious has attempted on multiple occasions to have Vader replaced. With Vader realizing the kind of threat that a combatant like Galen Marek would be to him, Vader took extreme steps to make sure that the Starkiller Clone would never develop in the same kind of way and to become that kind of combatant, and was much more hands-on on not only guiding the direction of the kind of force wielder combatant that he would be, but making sure that his skill set as a lightsaber fighter will compromise. Between the time of Galen Marek's death and the time of Starkiller's escape from Kamino, Vader had made adjustments to his fighting style which would allow him to respond to Starkiller's more fast-paced attack style, and even made modifications to his suit that would allow him to reduce the effect of force lightning would have on his body. Vader went out of his way to make sure that Starkiller never gained enough knowledge on Vader's skill sets and abilities to make sure that he was actively sabotaging Starkiller's training, which guaranteed that Vader would always maintain a significant edge over Starkiller. And the only reason that Starkiller obtained his victory over Vader was because Vader was actively holding back, as he had an overall objective to force Starkiller to surrender. In their battle, Starkiller recognized that he could not defeat Darth Vader in a lightsaber battle, so he allowed Vader to disarm him, knowing that Vader would not strike him down with a death blow. And once Vader had lost his hand and his lightsaber, Starkiller retaliated with the full might of his force abilities. These factors prove that had Vader fought Starkiller at the same level of seriousness that he had fought Galen Marek, that he would have killed Starkiller, because Starkiller's entire development as a fighter was designed for this exact scenario. Overall, there's no question that Starkiller is a skilled and effective combatant, given how little actual combat experience he gained, and on the battlefield against enemies who could not defend against these abilities, he would be a serious juggernaut, and his approaches as combatant give him a serious amount of advantage against non-force wielding opponents. But unfortunately for the Starkiller Clone, he has not had anywhere near enough time to truly master his combative capabilities to the level that would allow him to respond effectively to anything that was outside of the kind of opponent that he was used to contending with. Against a fully focused Vader who was willing to cut his losses and not hold back, he would have no issue killing Starkiller, and even opponents like Master Ram Koda and Shak T from the Force Unleashed 1 would experience great success against Starkiller. The memory flashes that Starkiller inherited from Galen Marek grant him an academic advantage, not a combative one, as Starkiller's skill sets are so vastly different that he would have extreme limited abilities to take advantage of Galen Marek's combative experiences. There is a huge difference between having the knowledge against a different combative approach and actually experiencing something for yourself. The memory flashes also affect Starkiller negatively, as they mostly seem to pop up in his mind at random moments during combat, interfering with Starkiller's concentration, and would provide his opponents with openings that they would absolutely exploit. Should Starkiller encounter a truly unconventional opponent who can respond to his force abilities and lightsaber capabilities, then he would find himself getting into trouble very quickly and would be forced to start making things up on the fly and not having a dedicated tactical strategy. Cal Kestis began his training during the Clone Wars under his master Jarrett DePaul, and this provided Cal with a strong foundation for which he could improve over time. While it's not been confirmed in any source, I do believe that Jarrett DePaul would have specialized in Formsnix Niman, and this specialization is something that he would have passed down to Cal. But with having a 5-year period of needing to stay in hiding, Cal's skill set would have regressed. With the addition of a newly built lightsaber, extensive battlefield experience against a wide variety of Imperial forces, dangerous wildlife across multiple different planets, and engagements against opposing Force users like the fallen Jedi Terran Malicos and the Second and Ninth Sister Inquisitors, Cal's skills as a lightsaber combatant developed greatly over a good period of time. As Cal was capable of fighting with single blade, double blade, while being able to perform many Jurkai attack sequences, over the period of 5 years of constantly fighting against the Empire would have granted Cal a massive amount of experience, and his skills with Niman would have improved greatly over that period of time. Since Niman was praised for taking elements of Forms 1 to 5, the combative experience that Cal received would have developed his proficiency with each of the prior 5 forms individually. His skill developed so far that he was even able to defeat the Ninth Sister Inquisitor quite easily. During Cal's mission to find Tantalor, his skills with the lightsaber would improve even farther with the addition of 2 more fighting styles in the forms of Crossguard and Blast Stance. It is my theory that Cal having access to now 5 different fighting stances allowed him to develop his skills with forms 1 to 5 individually, with his proficiency in Nyman allowing him to apply his improved use of a specific fighting form across a number of the other 5 fighting forms. And while being forced to stick to just 2 fighting stances is just a game mechanic, the extensive options that Cal's lightsaber provided him would have certainly allowed him to have access to all 5 fighting forms all at once, allowing Cal to switch between them depending on the combative situation he found himself in. Single Blade with its wide opening swings would have developed Cal's Form 1 Sicho, Blaster Stance would have improved Cal's precision with Form 2 Makashi, Double Blade would have improved Cal's defenses with Form 3 Sarisu, Dual Wielding would have improved Cal's speed with his use of Jar Kai, which has a strong foundation in Form 4 Taru, and Crossguard with its focus on strength and overwhelming an opponent's defenses would have improved Cal's use of both variations of Form 5 Xian and Gemso. Now again, I do not believe that Cal focuses exclusively on any one form of lightsaber combat while using a specific stance, but that it improves a quality of a specific lightsaber form for which Cal can then apply to the majority of the other fighting stances. As Cal was more than capable of applying strength-focused attacks, defensive blocks against opposing lightsaber opponents and blaster fighters, and applying physical speed maneuvers to evade and overwhelm his opponents, and across the majority of all his fighting stances would have greatly improved Cal's overall use of Niman to the beginning stages of a Jedi Master's level. As a Niman user, Cal was highly skilled within his use of applying force abilities alongside his lightsaber sequences. With Cal using telekinesis, he would apply force pushes to off-balance an opponent before falling with an immediate strike. He could also allow to perform the draw closer technique to pull enemies in before impaling them. He could lift enemies in the air before either attacking them directly or before following up force throw with his lightsaber. His skill performing lightsaber throws was so proficient that he was even capable of throwing his double-bladed lightsaber in a circular area, attacking anyone within the attack range. Cal was also skilled at applying physical strikes within his combative maneuvers. However, Cal has shown on multiple occasions against opposing force users that he is quite vulnerable to similar physical attacks. As a battle tactician, Cal was exceptional at watching his opponents and adjusting his approach whether he was facing groups of enemies, whether it be Imperial forces, dangerous wildlife, and even bounty hunters. However, when it came to single combat against an opposing force wielder, he has received his fair amount of victories and defeats, though there were a number of factors that came into play. Against the Ninth Sister in their first engagement, Cal was barely able to squeeze out a victory. Trilla he had to fight 3 times before he was comfortable enough to defeat her on his own. During his battle against the 5th Brother Inquisitor, who was recognized as the second most powerful Inquisitor behind only the Grand Inquisitor, while Cal would ultimately lose his battle and need to be rescued by Seer, Cal had just finished fighting through a gauntlet of enemies and was completely exhausted, and yet was still able to put up a good fight and adapt to the 5th Brother's tactics, but Cal's stamina was too low to effectively use his speed, which allowed the 5th Brother to take the advantage, and this is a weakness that would certainly cause Cal to be injured. Merrin provided assistance in both of Cal's fights against Bode and Terran Malicos, with Merrin being one who ultimately killed Malicos. And when it comes to all 3 of Cal's engagements against Dagan, in their first fight the best Cal could do was reach a stalemate. In the second fight, Cal held his own for time, but once Dagan had Cal pinned defensively, he would have been cut down if Bode hadn't arrived and caused a distraction, and Bode's assistance would be needed again in the third fight, when even after Cal was successful in stabbing Dagan in the chest after distracting with a force illusion, Dagan immediately responded with force choking Cal, and would have succeeded in killing him if Bode hadn't shot Dagan in the back, breaking his concentration, giving Cal the opening he needed to cut Dagan down for good. Cal has made a career of being able to compete with opposing force wielders who have had more combat experience and are naturally stronger force users. But despite how much of a combatant Cal has grown, he has still shown that he experiences serious difficulty against opponents who can apply a combination of unorthodox force abilities combined with overwhelming force, or against opponents that work around or through Cal's defense to overwhelm him. And without the assistance of an ally to rely on to help him through some of these tougher battles, Cal certainly would have been killed without question. In my previous matchup pitting Jedi Fallen Order Cal against Galen Marek, I felt comfortable granting Cal the slight advantage over Galen in this department, but this was only due to the fact that Cal was wielding a vastly superior lightsaber that granted him more options. Had Cal been equipped with the original broken lightsaber that he had at the beginning of Jedi Fallen Order, then Galen easily would have gotten the edge. And while Galen has had experience in single combat against multiple different opponents that used different variations of weapons and applied different combative tactics, he had never engaged anyone who could apply multiple different fighting stances combined with force abilities that he was not familiar with, which would allow Cal to completely switch up his combative moveset and tactical approaches as smoothly. However, when compared to Jedi Survivor Cal against the Starkiller Clone as lightsaber combatants, there is simply no question that Cal absolutely eclipses Starkiller. The problem for the Starkiller Clone is that his compromised skill set by Vader and his limited experience against opposing lightsaber combatants places him at a serious disadvantage when compared to someone like Cal, who is bringing far more combative approaches and options to this fight against Starkiller. Starkiller's use of Niman applied with the Jarkai technique is certainly highly effective on the battlefield, and as a combatant, I obviously would believe that he could certainly outperform Cal against multiple non-force wielding opponents, but that would only be in the battlefield conflicts only. Not only has Cal had extensive experience against multiple opponents that use advanced applications of the Jarkai technique combined with Nyman's principles of combining lightsaber maneuvers with force abilities, but Cal can fight like this too, and has had years of actual combat experience to improve this, which allows him to apply it against multiple different opponents. While both can use the Mnemon form to an effective level, Cal and Starkiller have taken two completely different approaches. The Starkiller Clone is more of a bulldozer and is capable of applying a multitude of different combative tactical approaches, but they all fall back on simply attempting to overwhelm his opponents. And the one time that Starkiller cannot actually overwhelm an opponent, he had to get creative against an opponent who was actively holding back, not wanting to kill him. While Cal is more of a Swiss Army knife, always having multiple options that he can choose from, and is always looking to change up his approach and force his opponent to react to him, and by doing so, they reveal strengths and weaknesses for which Cal can then adjust to. Unlike Starkiller, who falls back on a sort of autopilot mode while performing his lightsaber sequences while strategizing in his mind, Cal remains always in the present, and every strike, every block, every maneuver he performs is always prepared and calculated. And this approach also falls back on his ability to actually confuse his opponents and prevent himself from being very predictable. As a fellow 9-man practitioner, Exar Kun would be absolutely proud of Cal Kestis' ability to maintain a highly developed level of skill across 5 different fighting stances, many of which can actually be applied with various different versions of the first 5 forms of lightsaber combat, possibly granting Cal Kestis access to 20 different combative approaches. On a tactical level, even if one considers the possible insight knowledge that Starkiller would have on Cal's capabilities as a combatant, thanks to the memory flashes that he inherited from Galen Marek on how he fought Cal Kestis, that knowledge would be outdated by 5 years and not even consider how much Cal has developed as a combatant. While Cal's experience against Galen Marek would absolutely help him against Starkiller, while Galen Marek and Starkiller are very different in terms of their lightsaber applications as combatants, they are quite similar as Force users, and Cal's experience would grant him an insight knowledge of Starkiller's general Force capabilities. Starkiller is not a one-dimensional character, and given what little time he's had to develop, should be praised for his ability to mix up his various powerful combative techniques. But compared to Cal Kestis, Starkiller is sadly very conventional and cannot match Cal Kestis' flexibility. All Starkiller can do is fall back on his standard approach, and should the Starkiller clone not see the results that he wants, his only response would be to dedicate himself more into applying his strength and power in an attempt to overwhelm his opponent. But this kind of mindset against Cal Kestis would make him painfully predictable, causing Starkiller to suffer from a bad case of what Count Dooku called enslavement to form. And for all these reasons, Cal Kestis gets the edge in martial skills and as a battle tactician. Starkiller possessed a strong connection to the Force, which he inherited from his genetic template Galen Marek. Being created to be nothing more than a tool that Darth Vader could manipulate, his exceptional potential as a Force user was very useful in developing Starkiller his powerful combative capabilities. Like most Force users, Starkiller was adept on his use of physical augmentation, which allowed him to perform exceptional feats of speed, strength, and agility, and these aspects were key in his training to learn Form 4 Ataru. Much like Galen Marek, the Starkiller clone was able to meet Darth Vader's cybernetic enhancement strength head-to-head. The use of telekinesis was one of Starkiller's main combative Force abilities, and he made excessive use of this ability. In Starkiller's standard form, he would perform powerful Force pushes and pulls to neutralize and even kill opponents. Against enemies on the battlefield, he would lift and throw heavy objects, and with little effort could even grab up live enemies and completely crush their bodies. His use of Force Crush was mainly used against machines and opposing vehicles, and he was even capable of applying medium to long-range attacks with his use of lightsaber throws. Another one of Starkiller's more recognizable telekinetic attacks was his trademark use of the Force Repulse ability, which was a gathered burst of telekinetic energy which, when released in all directions, could cause a massive amount of destruction against opponents and the surrounding area. However, Starkiller in canon has only been seen employing this ability once, and that was to kill all the other Galen Marek clones. I personally believe that while Starkiller did perform an amplified version of this ability that certainly would have exhausted him, he is still more than capable of applying this ability with far less power, thereby not exhausting himself. When it comes to another one of Starkiller's more recognizable Force abilities, he was excessively skilled with the use of Force Lightning. He was capable of attacking multiple enemies at once and can even channel Force Lightning across his lightsaber after performing a power bow, tripling his attack range. He has also been shown using Force Lightning in creative uses, as an example being able to short out active machinery and even ignite volatile gases. Starkiller has also been skilled with the use of Force-based telepathy, using powerful Force mind tricks for both utility and combative purposes. While being able to use the mind trick, he was able to make subjects do his bidding and even erase their memories. Starkiller has shown significant levels of creating Force shields, an example being when he protected himself from the massive heat wave caused by the atmospheric re-entry of the Salvation, while at the same time using telekinesis to turn the vessel into a guided projectile during the assault on Kamino. Unfortunately, Starkiller inherited Galen Marek's weakness of not applying this ability to protect himself from telekinesis attacks. While he could certainly defend himself against attacks that he could identify and see coming, he never put up a continuous passive defense and would never put up a shield to guard against such attacks. Even low-level Force sensitive with a basic understanding of how to use telekinetic attacks could be a threat to Starkiller. However, Starkiller's most powerful ability that he could use is what the game calls Force Fury, but its official name is Force Enrage. While using this ability, all of Starkiller's offensive Force abilities are greatly amplified. He is capable of lifting and crushing AT-ATs with telekinesis and is capable of completely annihilating crowds of enemies with devastating lightsaber throws and bursts of Force Lightning. He was also capable of using the unique Force ability known as Tut Menace. This power was best used against energy-based attacks and could be used to either defend or contain the energy, or allow him to absorb the energy and then fire it right back, usually as a form of Force Lightning. However, it is stated that both Starkiller and Galen Marek could only use the Tut Menace ability while empowered by Force Enrage, and when it comes to the practical use of Force Enrage, Starkiller can only use this ability for a short period of time, and once it expires, Starkiller will need to rest himself after each use. And it is my theory, based on all the engagements that both Galen Marek and Starkiller have taken part in, that they are not able to access Force Rage whenever they want, and that this is a power that has to be built in over time and is usually meant to be used as a last resort, or trump card as we call it. In conclusion, the Starkiller clone was created to be nothing more than a Force tool that Vader could use as he saw fit, possessing powerful combative capabilities but lacking in sophistication and knowledge of some of the more unorthodox Force abilities. He mastered a fundamental collection of Force abilities to an exceptional high level, and while as a Force user, Starkiller is nowhere near the same level as power as some of the galaxy's most powerful Force users, at his best, he could certainly provide a recognizable threat to those kind of Force users. By the time Order 66 was issued, Cal's strength with the Force was quite basic, with Cal still being a Padawan, and the trauma caused by watching the death of his master would have severely weakened his connection to the Force. Over the course of his 5 years in hiding, the only powers he maintained was a basic level of telekinesis, physical augmentation, and Force stasis. By the end of the journey to find the Jedi Holocron, Cal not only had restored his connection to the Force, but had become much stronger than he had during the Clone Wars, shown as he was able to contend with much stronger users in the Force than himself. His strength in the Force would grow considerable over a period of another 5 years, while Cal continued to fight against the Empire, and his experience against a wide variety of opponents which included Imperial forces, bounty hunters, and mercenaries, and even Inquisitors. This would push Cal in developing his defensive capabilities to prevent himself from being completely overwhelmed, similar to what happened to him when he faced Terran Malicos. He would also work on developing various uses of his Force abilities to apply in combat. He could also use and apply the ability known as Force Sight, which would momentarily speed up his physical augmentation to dodge attacks at close range. When it comes to Cal's use of telekinesis, he could perform techniques like Force pushes and Force pulls, not only off-balance opponents, but actually pull his opponents closer to him so he could attack them. Cal has also shown that he can hold and even throw objects weighing several tons. Some new abilities that Cal learned with his use of telekinesis in that department is the ability known as Force Lift, which could actually lift up a live target and suspend them in the air. Force Slam would actually pull two targets together, causing severe impact damage. His use of Force Repulse was mainly used to off-balance his opponents. The Force Stasis ability was able to restrain and immobilize a person or moving object. The unique ability manifested itself as a shimmering transparent energy field resembling a haze of heat enveloping a target, and its user could cancel out the motion of a target to not only reduce its speed, but also suspend it in place. Like most Jedi, Cal was skilled with the use of telepathic force abilities like mind tricks and was capable of completely overwhelming weak-minded individuals into doing whatever Cal wanted them to do. And this skill also evolved over time into the beast control ability, which allowed Cal to manipulate wildlife and even forge bonds with animals that he could then use as mounts. In the middle of combat, Cal Kestis was also able to perform a unique variation of the mind trick ability, which was known as Confuse, in which he would compel enemies into not only fighting alongside himself, but also attack their enemies. And this would also in some cases cause his enemies to stop in place, as their minds would actually be so twisted that they would not be able to effectively fight back. During his final battle with Galen, Cal was able to use a limited variation of the Force Illusion ability, specifically the technique known as Masquerade, which allowed a user to project an image onto a person's mind over the user, ostensibly masking the user's appearance. However, it is questionable on how much control with this ability Cal can actually use, as this technique was performed at a moment of desperation, and this illusion was only ever projected within the environment that Galen was using his own Force illusion. So it might be that until Cal has had a significant amount of time to master this technique, that this Force illusion ability is only capable under specific circumstances. But Cal's most powerful and dangerous Force ability came out when Cal would be forced to embrace the full power of the dark side, and this Force ability also granted him the use of Force Enraged. Much like Starkiller, while empowered by Force Enraged, all of Cal's combative capabilities were greatly enhanced, but it seems that it also came with a few additional effects. Cal's version of Force Enraged seemed to manifest Cal's use of Force Stasis as not only being able to target a specific target, but actually affect an entire area, affecting everyone within Cal's immediate range. Within this area, Cal's use of Confusion would also have a serious negative effect on targets, not only compromising their ability to fight back, but weak-minded targets could literally be driven insane. Cal's use of telekinesis was also powerful enough to overwhelm the force shields of opposing Force users, completely immobilizing them. But Cal could only use this ability for a limited amount of time, and given the dangers of relying on a dark side ability this powerful, he certainly would work on limiting himself and making sure that he would only use it if he felt he had no other choice. In my last matchup, when Force powers came into play, the fundamental question that determined not only the department, but who would ultimately end up winning that match was what was better, Cal's quantity of Force abilities or Galen Marek's quality of abilities. And at the time, there was no question that Galen Marek's limited but better quality of Force powers would absolutely overwhelm anything Cal could bring against him once Galen was at his strongest. When the question of quantity versus quality comes up again this time, the result is somewhat different. There's an old saying that goes, quantity has a quality of its own. And not only has Cal vastly improved the quantity of his powers at his disposal, by having a good 5 years to develop himself, he has severely closed the gap of power between himself and the Starkiller Clone. As a Force user, Starkiller in terms of quality of Force powers is more or less at the same exact level as Galen Marek was when he died. Galen spent 10 years with training and practical combat experience against a wide variety of different opponents to become the Force wielder he was when he died, while at most, Starkiller has had maybe a couple of months of training and even less than a week's worth of actual combat experience. And with such little time, he added nothing new as a Force wielder combatively. When it comes to how each person applies the Force, while Galen Marek and Starkiller have the exact same skill set, they apply their skills in somewhat different ways. Galen Marek Whenever he fails to see the kind of results he's expecting, he changes his approach and spends time trying to find the proper way to adapt, and then once he finds it, he executes the plan. When Starkiller fails to see results, his response is to put more power into his attacks in an attempt to simply overwhelm his opponents. Galen Marek fights smarter, while Starkiller fights harder. And while the strategy of simply trying to overwhelm an opponent is certainly possible, this kind of use of the Force makes one painfully predictable. Starkiller may have inherited all of Galen Marek's strengths, but he also inherited his weaknesses too, and was not given the time to find answers to this weakness. Applying this alongside with the random memory flashes that Starkiller will have to deal with, and you apply a weakness that Galen Marek never had to deal with, and under these conditions, Starkiller will not only have trouble with telekinesis abilities, but he was also going to encounter problems with telepathic abilities. If you would allow me a moment to reference another incredible breakdown video, Rob Terra's Darth Zana vs. Galen Marek matchup, which I highly recommend, and it was actually the very video that inspired me to consider bringing back my own Versus series, revealed to me Galen Marek's vulnerability to telepathic attacks, and this is a weakness that I had never considered for the character. What's even more surprising is that both Darth Zana and Cal Kestis share the ability to use illusions and can attack their respective opponents with telepathic attacks, which would absolutely compromise their ability to fight back with the Force. And while Cal Kestis' use of these abilities is nowhere near as powerful or as dangerous as Darth Zana's spells of fear and madness, and would more than likely not be as effective against Galen Marek, they would absolutely be effective against the Starkiller Clone, whose already weak mental stability was practically programmed into his genetic makeup thanks to the memory flashes that he continued to experience during his training and during combat. On top of that, Cal as a Force user has an answer to a lot of things that Starkiller would throw at him, and we know for a fact that as a Force wielder, Cal has shown that he is able to compete and hold his own against Force wielders who are naturally stronger than him. A good example being Cal's engagements with Dagan, who was an extremely powerful Jedi during the High Republic era, which was a period where the Jedi Order was at its absolute strongest, and Dagan was recognized as being even more powerful once he fully embraced the dark side, and his strength with the use of telepathic abilities was so impressive that he could create entire areas of Force illusions and could actually knock someone out by simply looking at them. These are abilities that even someone like Darth Zana would be impressed by, and yet Cal was strong enough to hold his own for a good amount of time. In his basic level, Starkiller's use of telekinesis could be defended against, with Cal having strengthened his own defensive Force capabilities. If he attempts to use Force Lightning, it can be absorbed by either one of Cal's two lightsabers. If Starkiller attempts to either push or pull using his Force Enraged ability, Cal would simply respond with his own use of the ability that not only does the exact same thing that Starkiller's variation does, but comes with a number of extra effects that Starkiller simply cannot defend against. Now when it comes to Cal and his new use of Force abilities, their effect on Starkiller would be extremely effective. The Starkiller clone has shown to be exceptionally vulnerable to telekinetic attacks that he doesn't see coming, and Cal's more extensive variation of these type of attacks would mean that he'd be able to strike at Starkiller in ways he's never seen before. Cal's use of the Confusion ability would also bring up the memory flashes that Starkiller has consistently struggled to deal with, and would seriously compromise Starkiller's ability to focus and even fight back. And even if by a small chance that Cal is able to perform a basic level of the Force illusion ability known as Masquerade, perhaps he takes on the form of someone Starkiller knows, say perhaps, Juno Eclipse. He would immediately stop and Starkiller in his tracks, leaving him wide open to a killing blow. And should Cal have the use of this version of Force Enraged, then the combination of the various enhanced powers stacked on board his ability to combine a Force stasis field, making it impossible for Starkiller to move, added with the added effect of the negative effect that it would have on his mind, then Starkiller has the possibility of being driven completely insane. The only realm that Starkiller has an advantage over Cal Kestis when it comes to his use of the Force is his use of offensive Force abilities on the battlefield against multiple enemies who do not have the capability of defending themselves against such attacks. but in one-on-one engagements, Cal has built himself to be ready for this exact fight. In terms of overall offensive destructive magnitude, Starkiller, no question, is stronger than Cal. But Starkiller applies his force abilities with a Form 7 Juyo mentality of putting everything into offense at the expense of defensive capabilities, while Cal Kestis as a force user against the Starkiller clone would apply the Sensu technique of avoiding what is strong and striking what is weak. What this round ultimately comes down to is this. If we are talking pure magnitude of power in offensive combative abilities, even with Cal having had a good 5 years to develop his powers, the Starkiller clone is still stronger in that department. But what Cal has developed is a much wider collection of force abilities and improved his defensive capabilities, which would allow him to protect himself against someone like the Starkiller clone for a much longer period of time compared to how long he lasted when he faced Galen and Marek. Cal would have learned from experience that a direct head-to-head engagement when it comes to force abilities would lead to his own defeat again. So he would concentrate on using the abilities that he knows the Starkiller clone is not aware of, knowing that he could wear him down by targeting his non-existing defenses against telekinesis and targeting his mental weaknesses that the Starkiller's memory flashes will certainly provide. And should the fight get to the point where both combatants are pushed to their limit and have to use their respective uses of force in rage, Cal's version grants him advantages that allows him to affect Starkiller's ability to fight back with the force at all. And as hard as many people will want to believe this, and perhaps don't want to believe this, it is for these reasons that I believe that Cal Kestis, this time around, should get the edge in force abilities. When it comes to Cal Kestis taking on the Starkiller clone, there is no question in my mind that Cal Kestis is in for the fight of his life. But this time he is a bit more prepared, and in my view, has just enough to squeeze out a very, very close victory, similar to what he was able to do against Dag and Garrett in their last battle. Let's set up this fight. Let's say that this battle takes place on board the Salvation during the attack led by Vader's forces in Boba Fett. Cal got in contact with Juno Eclipse after discovering Tantalor and has been working with her for some time. During the attack, Cal sends BD-1 with Juno to help manage the configurations of the ship, while Cal holds off the attacking forces. At the same time, Starkiller and Rom Koda arrive at the Salvations and split up in order to find Juno. As Starkiller enters a large circular room, he encounters Cal, who at first looks shocked seeing Starkiller, but gets immediately angry seeing this opponent from his past that nearly killed him back on Bergano. Cal states that he's been preparing for this fight for years, while Starkiller seems a little confused having never met this person, and all he wants to do is find Juno Eclipse. But then suddenly Starkiller experiences a quick memory flash of Cal, and their battle begins. Cal immediately charges Starkiller with a single-bladed lightsaber, and Starkiller is having great success defending and countering Cal's attacks. Cal immediately changes his stance to begin using the defensive advantages of his double-bladed lightsaber style. Starkiller continues to put pressure and even throws in a couple of basic-level force pushes to increase the distance between the two. Cal then immediately changes his stance to begin to start using Jar Kai, and the two re-engage. At first, the two match each other speed for speed and blow for blow, but it is becoming clearly obvious that Cal is the much more skilled user of this variation of combat. Starkiller attempts to put more speed and strength into his attacks, but Cal is responding with incredible control. Starkiller then begins to apply his force abilities into his lightsaber maneuvers, but Cal has seen these attacks before and effectively uses his skills with force speed and force sight to dodge these attacks at close range. Starkiller continues to throw out force attacks, and Cal either evades Starkiller telekinesis attacks, absorbs Starkiller's force lightning with his lightsabers, and knowing that he can't risk falling back on his lightsaber, Starkiller increases the power in his force attacks, and despite Cal having much more improved Force defenses, he's starting to seriously struggle against Starkiller's assault, and he needs to come up with a new plan. As Starkiller begins to apply more power into his attacks, he experiences another memory flash, and as Cal sees this, he decides to change up his tactic and start using his confusion ability to attack Starkiller's mind, and it actually begins to work. Cal slowly makes his way towards Starkiller to finish him off, but instinctively, Starkiller fires off a powerful Force repulse, not only knocking Cal back a good amount, but seriously damaging the room, causing smoke to build up. As Starkiller gathers himself, he prepares to re-engage Cal, but as he looks around, he doesn't see him, but instead, he sees Juno lying on the ground. Starkiller runs over to Juno, believing she's hurt, and as Starkiller begins to turn Juno over to see if she's okay, Starkiller is immediately stabbed in the gut with a lightsaber, revealing that Cal had used his Force illusion ability, Masquerade, to trick Starkiller into lowering his guard. Cal immediately pushes Starkiller into a wall with a devastating Force push. Starkiller is now injured, but he is still into this fight, and this deception infuriates him, and he immediately uses his Force Enrage ability. Cal responds with, "This time, I know that trick too," and Cal immediately taps into the dark side of the Force using his own variation of Force Enrage. Both Starkiller and Cal Kestis have now both been empowered by the Force Enraged ability. But unfortunately for Starkiller, Cal's version of this ability actually begins to start attacking Starkiller's mind with even more ferocity, forcing Starkiller to experience every single painful moment of Galen Marek's life. With a combination of an amplified Force stasis field preventing Starkiller from moving, Cal immediately reaches out and grabs Starkiller with telekinesis and immediately slams him to the ground, pinning him, similar to what Galen Marek did to him years ago. Cal then pulls out his lightsaber, and with Starkiller scratching his head being tortured by memories, Cal walks over, and right as he's about to finish off Starkiller, a green lightsaber blocks Cal's attack, and Master Rom Koda yells at Cal to stop. Cal had met Rom Koda years ago during the Clone Wars while he was with his master Jarrett T'Pol. Cal makes the claim that Starkiller had served under Darth Vader and had almost killed him years ago, but Rom Koda explains all that Galen Marek had done in helping to create the Rebel Alliance, and that this man was not his enemy. Rom Koda immediately calms Starkiller's mind, and Cal apologizes for almost killing him, recognizing that Cal really needs to work on not needing to rely so much on the dark side of the Force. Starkiller explains that Koda and him were just there to find Juno, and it's at that moment that BD-1 runs into the room and tells Cal that Juno's been kidnapped. Cal puts his hand out and helps Starkiller up, and it's in that moment that Cal joins Starkiller and Rom Koda in their mission to assault Kamino and save Juno, which would ultimately lead to the capture of Darth Vader. Instead of taking down an old enemy, Cal Kestis has now made a new ally. I declare Cal Kestis, the Jedi Survivor, the winner. Please remember that this video is just my own personal opinion, and I would love to hear your comments and debate with you all in the comments down below. And just remember, that is my favorite part of making these versus series matchups. Just remember to be respectful, and if you like this matchup video and would like to see more, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to keep track of me and all my future videos and matchup videos that I have planned to upload over the course of this year. Our next matchup video will take us into the incredible gaming franchise that we know as Mass Effect, as Cor from Mass Effect Andromeda makes a return to take on the biotic powerhouse that we know as Jack from Mass Effect 3. Now, I'm going to push this matchup back just a little bit, that way it gives me time to work on some other videos, but I will be sure to keep you guys updated when this video will officially be uploaded. So until then, thank you guys for watching, you're awesome, and I'll see you guys next time.